The final report is out on the partial power loss on the Cardinal turnback after takeoff at Lake Placid. Partial power, it's a gotcha. Stick with me on FlyWire as I take a look and see what the NTSB came up with. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire I want to see what 2 years of investigation came up with on the accident on October 1st, 2023. Hopefully more detail and facts. I'm pretty confident on this one. Actually, I've already read it. So anyway, here's the setup. AOPA was there with an A-36 to serve as a camera ship with the Cardinal as the subject airplane. Apparently the objective was to shoot pictures for an article and possibly a cover shot for the magazine with the colorful fall leaves of the surrounding area. It's pretty in northern New York there. During taxi out, the A-36 pulled up next to the Cardinal with the engine running, and then the Cardinal engine shut off and then was restarted a few seconds later, shortly after, for an unknown reason. Shortly thereafter, the A-36 took the runway, followed by the Cardinal about 700 feet in trail. And we'll see some pictures from the photographer, and he took some shots as they were in the takeoff process. A witness observed the Cardinal take off and thought the prop was set for climb and not takeoff. And he was thinking that the engine was not running at full power. Cardinal made a gentle left turn, people say 300 to 400 feet in the air, closing to about 1,000 feet in trail of the A-36. Reportedly, the Cardinal made a sudden hard right turn back towards the airport. Another pilot-rated witness observed that the Cardinal takeoff after the A-36 was had a slightly longer takeoff roll, noting white smoke come out of the exhaust just after the wheels left the pavement. He watched the Cardinal turn left to follow the A-36, followed a few seconds later by the right turn back to the airport. He estimated the Cardinal was 300 to 400 feet in the air in a continuous right turn. He stayed nearly level until about 90 degrees to the runway when the nose dropped noticeably. He did not hear the engine. And then another witness reported that he thought he heard the engine sputter during the takeoff and roll and then returned to normal. During the turnback, another witness said it sounded like it was at a reduced power setting. The engine was. Pilot of the A-36 heard the pilot-rated passenger make a radio call announcing their return to the airport with a problem. As the A-36 turned to follow, the photographer continued to shoot pictures, and we got a couple of those we're going to look at here in a second. These pictures showed no abnormal emission from the airplane, that the flaps were partially extended, and just before impact, a few seconds before impact, the landing gear may have been in transit with the nose pitch up being applied very close to the end. That we're not going to see in a picture. The investigators concluded that the density altitude was about 2,800 feet and affecting the airplane performance with a 37% greater takeoff roll and a 28% reduction in climb rate. This is with normal power at gross weight. Okay, so the performance was a little bit affected. It speaks for the longer takeoff roll. You know, whether or not the engine was developing full power or not is an issue. 2 residential video cameras recorded the airplane passing right to left in a descending right turn just before impact. And spectrum analysis of one of those, the audio, determined that the engine was likely running at about 2,100 RPM. So the engine was running, but not at full power. Calculating weight and balance with 40 gallons of fuel, the airplane was 1 inch forward of CG and just shy of 300 pounds below gross weight. With 60 gallons of fuel, the airplane was 172 pounds below gross weight and 1.2 inches forward of CG. It is unknown just how much fuel the airplane had on board at the time of the accident. It appears the right wing was full because there was significant leaking out of the filler on the right wing. There was no flight recorder, not a surprise in GA airplanes, but the portable GPS device on board did record position and speed data, and that was a huge boon to the investigation. More on that in a bit. A few days before the accident, the pilot owner asked a local flight instructor if he would accompany him on a practice flight in preparation for this photo mission. He hadn't flown the airplane very much. They discussed what actions to take if an emergency was encountered during takeoff or departure, and then after takeoff on that flight, about 200 feet in the air, They heard a very loud noise and felt a draft. The instructor turned back and observed the baggage door was wide open. At that point, they believed they were about 500 to 800 feet in the air. The pilot immediately made a very steep bank to the left, he was in a left turn, made a very steep bank back to the right to turn back to the runway, approach in and landed in the opposite direction. The GPS data from that flight revealed that just after liftoff, the airplane made a sharp roll to the left, reaching 40 degrees of bank, and then rolled to the right at 27 degrees of bank as it aligned with the runway. The turn rate during the left turn was 9.6 degrees per second, which is just over 3 times a normal turn rate. The GPS showed a maximum altitude to be about 400 feet during the event, okay, which is, it's corrected for pressure and all that stuff. So, you know, it's a little bit different from what their perception was. The turnback maneuver during the accident flight was very similar to the baggage door open event. Okay, let's go over that training maneuver performed first. Looking at the graphic here, the airplane lifted off on runway 32 about 10, 12, 20 seconds. And 36 seconds later began a sharp roll to the left, and that turn was then followed by a right. And that left turn was shown as negative in this graphic, followed by a sharp roll to the right, the alignment for the alignment with the runway. Here's the flight path of the event, and it's very you'll see in a sec, it's really almost identical to the accident flight itself. The next graph shows lift and altitude over time. 1.46 is the stall coefficient of lift, and then 1.69 is the stall coefficient of lift with 10 degrees of flap. The entire maneuver remained well within the stall margin of the aircraft. Okay, this graph shows total energy, kinetic and potential of the maneuver. The dip in purple line is the kinetic energy or speed. We can see that the speed was flat just before the baggage door popped open, and I think we can tell pretty closely what had happened here, when it happened. 4 seconds after that event, the pilot began trading airspeed for altitude, and then takeoff to landing was 1 minute and 26 seconds. Pretty fast. The turn back for a door pop was successful with a good stall margin. Okay, I said that. It was successful, but it was an absolutely terrible idea. Seriously aggressive maneuvering at low altitude and airspeed is a setup for a stall and a crash. In the instructor's statement, he noted that the pilot's aggressive turning was upsetting, to say the least. It is not apparent, he made a statement, it is not apparent how he debriefed the maneuver. It's definite that the pilot took it as a lesson learned for how to handle a similar situation in the future. And that's the unfortunate thing. So I'm sorry for all you Cardinal drivers out there, but I've always felt the airplane to be a marginal performer with just not enough power. It's just underpowered. The lesson this pilot learned was that you can horse it around at low altitude. 400 feet AGL is very low altitude in my book, and aggressive maneuvers are generally not a good idea. That's the unfortunate lesson that he learned here. Fast forward to the 1st of October and the photo flight planned for a 4 p.m. takeoff. The crew of both airplanes, by all reports, did a professional job of briefing and planning for the flight. The pilot owner of the airplane would be PIC, and Richard McSpadden, who was pilot rated and worked for the AOPA as well as the Safety Foundation, he would handle the airplane during the formation work, which was a good plan. If you don't know how to do it, then you don't know how to do it. We already know the sequence, but just as a reminder, let's look at the oblique perspective of the accident flight path. This looks startling close to the pilot's practice flight just a few days early, as I mentioned. Now let's look at the bank angle and altitude over time, this graphic here. We can see that the left turn was not nearly aggressive as the first one for the practice, but only reached about 12 degrees over about 20 seconds. The right roll was very aggressive, touching 39 degrees at the point of highest altitude above the ground, only 6 seconds before impact. Okay, huge, very, very aggressive. The speed altitude over time graphic here is very instructive. This shows the max speed of 74 knots calibrated airspeed occurred at 4:8:24 seconds. About 4 seconds later, the left roll reversed aggressively into the noted right roll. Altitude continued to increase as speed decreased. The pilot was pulling back on the stick during the roll to the right and the speed decreased for the next 15 seconds. The maximum altitude was 1,930 feet MSL with a field elevation of 1,747. That means they're about 200 feet above the ground. At that inflection point, the airplane reached 57 knots calibrated airspeed and then began descending at 1,300 feet per minute. Recall that the airplane was on the heavy side and forward of CG. The net result is that stall speed is higher due to the CG plus the energy required for the turn. The NTSB investigator feels that the airplane aerodynamically stalled at this point. And frankly, I wouldn't disagree with him. It appears that the pilot did relax the pull slightly and the airplane accelerated, so it got out of the stall. And looking at this lift altitude over time graphic, we can definitely see that the lift coefficient exceeded the stall limit for a very short period of time. That's where it burned energy. That cost a lot of energy in this whole event and made probably the difference. The energy graphic shows the decrease in overall energy from the power loss event at 408 and 24 seconds. The ballistic effect of the established climb prior to the power event was enhanced by the extra G of the pilot increasing potential energy, but it ended up only being slightly. It wasn't very much. In the end, the aircraft crashed 15 feet short of level on of the runway on a small hill, and then it slid about 30 feet down the embankment. Right wing low first. Given the similarities between the practice flight and the accident flight, I think there really is no doubt that the owner was at the controls for the entire time for the flight. From the pictures obtained by the NTSB, we can tell that the airplane had its gear down throughout the takeoff and the initial climb period, which was a fairly long delay if you think about it, and I'm curious about that. But in the last one before impact, it appears that the right main gear is trailing. You can't quite see the left gear. It's not sticking out where it should be, so it's obscured a little bit. Post-crash pictures show that the main gear in trail and touching the fuselage. They're not in the well. They were being deployed or something. So they were definitely not up or down. Okay. It is very likely that the pilot raised the gear in an attempt to reduce drag during the later stages of the turnback. That's my take on that situation. Okay, just to make up for that extra energy that they lost. I have heard Cardinal folks say that the gear in transit does not affect the drag that much. And that's an anecdotal comment. Okay, without hard data to evaluate that observation, I just don't buy it. I mean, you can't tell sitting in the seat what is the more drag, highest drag period or not. Frankly, I think the worst drag condition of the gear in an RG Cardinal is during the sequencing. The Cessna is the same. The 210s use the same thing, or in 172s. At a normal gear operating speed, I would say that holds true for most retractable gear airplanes. And I've checked it on my Bonanza, and I know that gear sequencing is the high drag point when the gear is moving. Overall, I think the NTSB, especially the subject matter experts, did a really good job on this investigation. I do, however, have a problem with the probable cause. It was most likely that a partial power loss triggered the accident, but the reason it was fatal was that the aggressive low altitude maneuvering part. That's the key there. It wasn't just a contributor, it was material. My version of the probable cause here is that the pilot aggressively maneuvered the airplane at a very low energy state and then likely compounded the problem by raising the gear. He stalled it, and then he raised the gear to really high drag events that used up any extra energy they might have had. What is the most important lesson to learn from this accident? Okay, I've been flying photo missions for over 30 years, and I have a very strong protocols that I use to stay alive, because you can get in some weird situations. I wish Richard and I had had a discussion about photo mission flying. We didn't, but we did have a talk or two about the turnback exercise, and we disagreed on the efficacy of it. Various pilot and witness comments here had posited that the altitude would be 400 AGL or more. The GPS data indicates that it never got much above 200 feet. Okay, our perceptions as humans are flawed, and if not in regular practice, our judgment of altitude and energy available is not reliable. Okay, what it was in a different airplane at a different time, colder, hotter, whatever, is not going to be the same as right now. If you're low and slow, it's no time to be aggressive with the airplane. The physics worked out for the practice flight, But to be honest, for a door pop, it's not a life and death situation. And the pilot should have flown a standard pattern, just around calmly and landed. Maybe with a few knots extra speed, but it shouldn't have been a panic, hard, aggressive maneuver like that. And I think the instructor should have debriefed just that. The wrong lessons were learned from a lucky incident. And that was the setup for this fatal accident. The pilot tried to apply his lesson learned, and he did not have enough energy to do so. He could not replicate it. That's what he was trying to do, is replicate that successful one with his door pop. Sometimes stuff happens, then the only thing you can do is find the smoothest spot you can to land on. It may not be pretty or smooth, but landing slow under control means your survival chances go way up. So I think that should be the target here. In this case, the partial power situation was a seductress. It bought approximately 26 seconds before impact. If the engine had totally failed, the descent rate of wind would have been around 25 feet per second, which would mean that he had about 4 seconds to pick a spot. That isn't much. But the big difference here is that he had partial power, so that gave him a little bit of breathing room to find a spot to land, not go back to the airport. It was either or. The partial power presented them with that time. And frankly, this is the exact reason that Richard and I disagreed about the turnback maneuver. Pilots would learn the wrong lessons and attempt a maneuver that would not end well. They would think they would have the proficiency and the skill to accomplish something that was probably not likely. You only have one chance and everything has to be perfect. How often does that happen? Hardly ever, okay? Unless you're an active airshow pilot in the airplane you practice in all the time, don't try a turnback, okay? If you don't practice turnbacks, don't try one. Pick a spot ahead of the wings and land under control as slow as you can. That's the story I like to tell, not this one in a YouTube video. I'm like everybody else. In my mind, I'm a great pilot. But for a turnback situation, and I've tried them, I've practiced them, I have an altitude target for a particular airplane, and that, if I don't have that altitude target, my spot is ahead of my wings. I just have to find it. That's all there is to it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.